Good day, philosophers. In this module, we begin with the question, what is a definition? Now, this is a kind of fun question. It's fun in part because if you think about it, I'm asking you, what is the definition of a definition? So that's the kind of weird self-referential stuff that can be interesting. But we'll see that this question of what is a definition is going to be essential for us to understanding what's really going on as we begin to read Plato and we encounter Socrates within Plato's writings challenging people, we'll see, to come up with the definitions of things, right? And so, but it's really important for us to really understand what Plato is all about by thinking for ourselves for just a moment about that question of what is a definition, right? And so I asked this question in the beginning of this class all the time, and I've done this for years, and I've asked students, what is a definition? And essentially, the kinds of things that people say about what a definition is comes down into two categories. You can look at what you guys responded in the discussion boards, but kind of comes down in two categories. First, I'll hear people talk about definitions in terms of a word or a term. Like, for instance, someone will say that a definition is what a word means. It's some kind of description or something like that to try to say what we mean by a particular word, right? Now, contrasted with that, I'll often see folks say something kind of like this. Say something like, what a thing is, right? And so both of those really are arguably correct definitions of what a definition is. In one sense, there's this emphasis on a word, right? And we're saying that the definition is some words that tell you what another word means. In this other sense, though, we're talking about a thing and really what that thing is. Now, we might use words to try to describe what that thing is, but the definition is going to what something is as opposed to just referring to some words. Let's think about that for a second. Let's take a look at this picture here. And what do you see there? What do you see there? Let's see. Let's make it a little bigger. There we've got a what? What's coming to mind when you look at this? What, a dog, right? Or a puppy. This was actually my dog, Lucy, when she was much younger. She's like 4 now. We were washing her in the sink. I don't know if you can tell that. It's good times, But when you first see this picture, you might immediately think of the word dog, right? Be like, okay, there's the word dog. Now, my question is the word dog the same thing as a dog? Is the word dog the same thing as a dog, right? So if we're talking about what a word means, right, we could say there's the word dog, okay, and that word dog could be thought by like some person here. Here's a nice person. They're thinking about the word dog. But is the word dog the same thing as a dog? Well, obviously not. Let's just think about some of the reasons why. Well, first of all, when you use the word dog, that was only one possible choice of a word that could have referred to that particular thing right there, down there, right? We could have also said like perro, which is Spanish for dog. You could say Hund, which is German, So there's certainly other words that can refer to that exact same thing, right? That a dog itself. Or you might have used larger or smaller categories to refer to that, right? You might have said animal. You might have said like living thing. I mean, who knows? There's all kinds of words that you could try to use in reference to that thing. And so obviously there's a difference between the dog and the word that we use to describe it. There's also an interesting thing here, if we just reflect on the words itself too. Like the word dog, it actually could mean and refer to many more things than just this particular thing. Not just other dogs, but even different kinds of things, right? So for instance, depending on the context, like if someone said dog, you would probably in most instances, you would think of a living animal. Like for instance, this is one example that could be a dog. But what else could this person have been thinking about? Well, like I've also heard people refer to their friends as dogs, right? Be like, where are my dogs at? Right? I don't know. Or, I've heard the phrase that all men are dogs. What does it mean to call a man a dog in that sense? I don't know. You think about it, right? And so we could refer to a certain kind of man, right? As, being a, I don't know. You know what I mean? And also, we could refer to what? Say you're at a baseball game. Might be like, hey man, grab me a beer and a dog. And then they're probably bringing back a certain type of food. Hopefully they're not going to bring back, a golden retriever or something like that. That's what Lucy is. There's all different things that we could mean by the word dog that would change depending on the context. Now, this kind of pushes me to want to reflect a little bit more carefully about the differences in thinking about the definition of a word versus the definition of a thing, right? Let's dig in. And so there's a couple of ways that when we think about the definition of a word versus the definition of thing, that those things will differ, right? So first of all, they can differ in their source, and they will also differ in their characteristics, right? And so if I said words, right, if I think of the definition of a word and words in general, like first of all, what's the source of the definition of a word, right? Well, where do the definitions of words come from? Well, you might first say, well, they come from like a dictionary, right? When you're a kid, you learn to look things up in the dictionary, of course, but where do dictionaries come from, right? There's another little cute video that I'll probably post a little snippet of in this module, but of someone who's a lexicographer. And lexicographers are what you call people who write dictionaries. Now, do the lexicographers make up the words? No, right? The lexicographers, the dictionaries, they come from another source. Where do they come from? Well, they come from language, right? The language that's language, if I could write here, that is spoken or written by people, right? By people. And so in essence, when we think about where a dictionary comes from, the dictionary comes from people, right? The words that we use. Now, it's really funny. If you just reflect for a second, like what is a word? Quite literally, a word is like it's a bunch. It's sounds, right? Or it's some symbols, right? And so, for instance, on this piece of paper right now, you see a bunch of symbols or collections of symbols that come together to mean a word for you, right? I could have other symbols like I don't know. I'm just making things up now, and when you look at those collections of symbols, that doesn't mean a word for you because, well, it just doesn't. Or if you hear the sounds that I make, all these sounds that are coming out of my mouth, they are words for you because why? Why are all these things words? And part of it just comes from a kind of common agreement between people, right? A bunch of people come together, maybe not in a formal way, but we as a community know and have agreed that certain sounds and certain symbols take on meanings, in part because just because we inherit them. It was sort of established through a long tradition of humans before us, and we sort of grow up into this traditions. We have this kind of culture of people where we have this language, and that language is really just this sort of established set of sounds and symbols that are meant to mean particular things. It also is interesting thing though, if we get past that, is that what can be a word within one group of people can actually be different in another group. There's obviously different languages themselves from one culture, one nation, one ethnicity to the next, but there's also just even differences within our own society. Like for instance, I was one time traveling down south. I was doing some music and was going to a gig. And I think I was in Alabama. And we stopped at a restaurant, and I was getting something to eat, and I asked for the waitress if I could have a Coke, and she said, "Sure, you can have a Coke." But then she just kept staring at me, waiting for something, and I said, "Yeah, I'll have a Coke." She said, "Oh, you want a Coke?" I wasn't sure what kind of Coke you wanted. And I was like, "What kind of Coke?" I guess not diet, just regular Coke, please. And she was like, "Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I might have wanted like a Sprite or something." I'm like, "What? I mean, Sprite is not Coke." But as it turns out, a word like Coke is actually a general term for soda. Or if you go to the Midwest, it's called pop. I was actually born not in Poland, but in Cleveland. And I grew up using the word pop, right? So there's all different kinds of words, right? And they come about through the agreement of people. For instance, there's another word here. Another word. Are you guys familiar with the word logled, spelled Logled? It actually describes something. Something could be logled or not logled. Usually humans. I'm not aware of non-humans really being logled, except maybe in some crazy art. Do you guys know what logled means? You could Google it, I guess. To be logled is to be, I'm logled right now. If we were in class, we would have a fun little activity. I'm logled right now. Oh, I'm not logled anymore. I'm logled when I'm wearing glasses, right? That's what the word means. And I made up that word. Yeah, I made it up. I mean, no one else uses the word logled except for me and now you. And it is a word because now within our community, we've taken that sound and that we've taken those symbols and we've ascribed them a meaning. And so words themselves, they come about through a community of people that ultimately give that sound or that symbol that particular meaning, right? That a word will only remain a word so long as there's people that have an agreed upon meaning for that sound. Right. This is also a funny thing where I always grew up, we grew up having teachers who probably said things like correcting our language and saying, oh, when you say that word, that's not really a word, right? I always thought, what do you mean? What, in a paper or something like that, you're telling me that a word is not a word. Did you understand what I meant? Did you? And if you understood what I meant, then it was a word. Now, it might not be the correct word to use within this context, within this social situation where all of a sudden, due to constraints put upon us by the communities with which we're communicating, we might decide not to use particular words or be more careful in our language. It didn't mean that it wasn't a word. It just wasn't a proper choice of a word to use in that context. But anytime a sound or a symbol has a meaning that's understood by others through that community, then it is a word for them. That somehow what's going on in my mind and your mind matches up through some type of common agreement. So there we go. We thought about what words mean, right? And so this is ultimately the source of where words come from. They come from people. What about things? And I think about the definition of a thing. Where does the definition of a thing come from? What is its source, right? Well, is the source of the definition of a thing the same thing as the source of the definition of words, right? So for instance, the definition of a word comes about through the agreement of people. But if I'm talking about the definition of a thing, what do I really mean? I don't mean what a word means. I mean what a thing is. Where does the definition of what a thing is? What makes a thing a thing? Where does that come from, right? In some sense, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about sort of the nature of what a thing is, right? Another way we frequently use this, I'm sorry, I'm running out of space here, but the essence of a thing, right? Where does that come from? Does that come upon the agreement of people, right? And so this is actually a little bit more weird. Where is the source of the definition of a thing, right? What we mean is what makes a thing what it is. So for instance, we could say, well, we know where the word dog comes from and where the meaning comes from. The meaning of the word dog comes from the sounds that a bunch of people use when they make reference to, say, that particular thing right there, right? But what does the source of the definition of a thing? And what are we talking about here? Now, what makes a dog a dog? Like, I might ask the question here, like, what is a dog? What really is a dog? Not do I mean by the word dog, but what really is a dog? What makes a dog a dog? That's a tougher question. I might ask you, like, so now, what makes a dog a dog? Well, you might say the dog's DNA. Well, true. I mean, in some ways, written within the DNA of a dog is sort of what makes a dog a dog. But it's a much more complicated question, right? To try to understand what really makes a dog different from something else. Now, this is going to be interesting when we talk about all different other classes of things, you know? We could talk about what makes a dog a dog. We could also talk about things like, and we will, about things like justice. Like, what is justice, right? We'll see that that's a fundamental question that Socrates is going to be asking in Plato's Republic, right? We might ask a question like, what is wisdom? Like we asked in last class. But to ask what these things are is what we're going to see is different from just trying to say what they mean. We're trying to get to, again, what they are. And getting to what they are, I don't really have an exact answer for you now. But we will see that our answers to what makes a thing what it is actually has philosophical importance. We're starting to get now into metaphysics, right? Remember we made that distinction last class between ethics and axiology in general, which included politics and aesthetics and stuff, and epistemology, which is the study of what it means to know. And then finally, metaphysics, which is the study of reality, the study of being. That as we start to get this question of what really makes a thing what it is, we're asking a deeper metaphysical question. And we'll see that as we when we raise this question about the definition of a thing, we're getting into what Plato is going to refer to as something that's more like some kind of universal, right? What is the nature of universals? Not just the words that we use, but these universal natures that seem to exist, because there seems to be all kinds of dogs that exist and all kinds of humans that exist and all sorts of things that you might call just or unjust. And what's that universal thing that connects them all together? And that is going to be part of what Socrates is going to be challenging us to do. He's going to say, as we'll read in these texts, that Socrates is going to be encountering folks who are sitting there trying to say something about a word, and Socrates is going to say it's not enough for you to talk about what you mean by a word, but we need to get to what a thing is, and that is a much deeper and more difficult question. And that's so we see that there is a fundamental difference in the source of the definition of a word versus the definition of a thing, but we can also reflect very quickly about, say, the characteristics of the definition of a word or a definition of a thing, right? For instance, the stability of it. Like, so if I think about language itself and the words that we use, again, come from some type of agreement between people. And so what kind of are words stable? Well, not necessarily, right? Words can change meaning, right? Words will change. Let's see here. Words change. And they'll change with the people that are using them, right? So if people all of a sudden start to ascribe a different meaning to a sound, all of a sudden that word will change its meaning. And even from one group to the next, there can be little subtleties in what a word would mean for one group or another. So words don't have much stability at all because people aren't all that stable, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we end up writing things like dictionaries, is to try to bring stability to the human language so that we can communicate more readily and easily. But what about the definition of a thing? Is a definition of a thing something that's changing or unchanging? Well, this is an interesting, again, a philosophical viewpoint. For the most part, as we read Plato and Socrates, we're going to see that the definition of a thing, these universals, these things will not change. It's going to say things don't change. Now, when I say things don't change, we're not going to specifically say that a specific dog doesn't change, but what makes a dog doesn't change, right? Dogs are always what dogs are. Now, here's a fun thing. Like, how does that connect with, say, an idea of, say, something like evolution, right? What if in evolution we see some things changing from one thing to something else? Well, maybe our response here, as we start to study Plato, and we'll see what some of his answers are there, is not that there's no evolution in things, but he's saying that at some point a thing stops being what it was. So, for instance, if you have an evolution of a dog, that a dog will remain being a dog. Now, some of the characteristics of what makes a dog some of the characteristics of a dog might vary, but the ultimate definition of what a dog is will remain the same, even if some of its more accidental characteristics change along the way. And at some point, it is possible that a dog will stop being a dog, that a dog might evolve into being some other kind of thing. So it's a kind of interesting thing there. But we'll raise that. We'll talk about that question again much later in a later module when we really get to Plato's answer to this. For now, we just need to realize what's the difference between the definition of a word and a thing. Well, first of all, words come from people, and because people are fickle, the characteristics of words are going to be always changing, while things are much more complicated to know. What is the definition of a thing is somehow getting to what it is, and that's a more difficult thing to try to put into words. And but it's theoretically something that is in and of itself, though, more inherently stable. The thing that we're trying to get to know, what a dog is or what something is something that we'll see, at least from certain philosophical viewpoints, is something that is not always changing. So have a beautiful day, and I'll catch you in the next lecture.